Have you ever sat alone in a perfectly quiet room, only to realize your mind is anything but silent? After 60, when the children are grown, work has faded into memory, and the outside world no longer demands your attention, something strange often begins to happen. The noise doesn't go away. It simply moves inward. The mind, once distracted by responsibilities, now fills the silence with memories, regrets, worries, and echoes of what has been, or what might be. Why does this happen? Why does the silence outside sometimes make the noise inside louder? Welcome, dear friend, to the Lotus of Dharma, a haven where ancient Buddhist wisdom meets the quiet pain of modern life. In this video, we explore a truth that many people only discover in the later chapters of their lives. Silence does not come from the absence of sound, it comes from the presence of awareness. You will hear stories, exercises, and profound reflections that can change the way you relate to your own thoughts, loneliness, and aging. This is not just a video, it is a journey back to the silence that you carry within you. So I invite you watch until the end. Let each word settle like a gentle rain on your awareness. And if something resonates, leave a comment, share your insights, and subscribe to join us on this journey. Many people look forward to retirement as if it were a gateway to peace. They imagine a life with fewer obligations, quiet mornings by the window, and long afternoons undisturbed by schedules or noise. They believe that when the phone stops ringing, when the house grows still, when the world slows down, the mind will naturally follow. But that is not always the case. In truth, outer silence often unmasks the inner noise we have spent decades avoiding. When the busyness of daily life fades, we do not always encounter peace. We often encounter ourselves. I remember a conversation with a retired physician, an intelligent, compassionate woman who had dedicated her entire life to the care of others. She said, with tears quietly gathering in her eyes, "All my life, I longed for silence. But now that I have it, I can't stand it. The voice in my head keeps playing back every decision, every mistake, every conversation I wish I'd handled differently. The regrets are louder than traffic ever was." This is the paradox of silence. When the external world falls quiet, the internal world often grows louder. The Zen Master Zen once said, "To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things." But for many, the first step of studying the self is overwhelming. What we find is not peace, but a storm, the clashing of past and future, memory and imagination. The present moment becomes a blur, lost in the noise of what was and what could be. This is what Buddhist philosophy calls monkey mind, a restless awareness, leaping from one thought to another without pause. When we are young and busy, we do not notice it. But as the world around us becomes quieter, we finally begin to hear the chatter we carry within. We must understand something very important. Silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is the absence of resistance. It is not given to us by our surroundings. It must be cultivated from the inside out. As the Buddha taught, just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life. And this spiritual life begins when we stop running from ourselves. The mind is like a child left alone in a room. Without guidance, it will create stories, often painful ones. It will replay moments from long ago, asking unanswerable questions. What if I had done things differently? What if I failed to protect the people I love? Did I waste too much time? Have I truly lived? These questions are not wrong. But when they are left unchecked, they become anchors that pull us away from the now. And the present, this breath, this moment, is the only place where life truly happens. Thich reminds us, the present moment is filled with joy and happiness. If you are attentive, you will see it. But attention is not automatic. It must be trained, like a muscle that has been neglected for many years. When the external world slows down, the internal one does not simply fall quiet. It resists. It rebels. And that resistance is where much of our suffering lies. So what can we do? We must learn to sit with the noise, not to fight it, not to silence it, but to witness it. To become the sky, not the weather. Imagine sitting by a river. The water flows swiftly past, sometimes clear, sometimes muddy. You do not jump in. You simply watch. This is how we must learn to sit with our thoughts, not as participants, but as observers. In the Dhammapada, it is written, "As a solid rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not moved by praise or blame." We, too, can become that rock. Not by avoiding silence, but by moving deeper into it. You see, dear friend, the most powerful silence is not found in a quiet room. It is found in the heart that no longer clings to noise. It is the silence that arises when we stop trying to change the past or control the future, and instead return again and again to the one place we have always belonged, the present moment. And in that return, we begin to hear something else, something more subtle than thought, more enduring than memory. We begin to hear ourselves. There is a quiet confusion that follows many of us into old age, the belief that a mind filled with thought is a sign of awareness. We think that the more we analyze, remember, and reflect, the more conscious we are. But the Buddha taught that true awareness is not thinking, it is knowing the nature of thought. To be lost in a sea of thoughts is not the same as being present with life. One can be deeply tangled in memory or regret, and never touch the moment that is happening now. This misunderstanding becomes more visible as we grow older. The world around us becomes quieter, yet the mind continues its chatter. It does not rest just because we have more time. In fact, it may grow louder. We revisit moments we cannot change. We hold private conversations with people who are no longer here. We replay what we should have said, or fear what is yet to come. The mind moves like wind through dry leaves, never still, never quiet. And we mistake this movement for aliveness. I remember sitting with an elderly woman by a calm lake. Her granddaughter asked, "Grandma, what do you think about when you're alone?" The woman smiled gently and said, "I think about the friends I've lost, the words I didn't say, and the life I didn't live. Sometimes I even talk in my head to people who are no longer alive." Then she looked out at the still water and whispered, "But I rarely just sit and watch the lake, and let it be enough." Her voice trembled with something I could not name, perhaps regret, perhaps tenderness. But her words echoed a deep truth: we have forgotten how to be with what is. We do not need more thoughts. We need more presence. In Zen, they teach, when walking, just walk. When sitting, just sit. But above all, do not wobble. Yet most of us wobble not in body, but in mind. We eat while planning, rest while worrying, listen while preparing to respond. This is not awareness, it is absence disguised as activity. A busy mind is not a clear mind. A restless thinker is not a wise one. Wisdom arises not from the quantity of thought, but from the depth of stillness. The monkey mind jumps from one idea to another, not because it is curious, but because it is afraid to stop. And unless we learn to pause, we spend our lives swinging through memories and imagine futures, never touching the ground of now. True awareness begins when we stop believing every thought that appears. When we see thoughts not as commands or identities, but as passing clouds in an open sky. You are not the story in your head. You are the sky that holds it. And in that recognition, a profound peace begins to emerge, not because thought has ended, but because you are no longer caught inside it. The mind will always think, just as the heart will always beat. But you are not the mind. You are the one who notices. And that noticing, that simple, spacious awareness is the beginning of freedom. Many people believe silence is simply the absence of sound, a quiet room, no traffic outside, no television humming in the background. But in the Dharma, silence is something far more profound. It is not about the world being quiet. It is about the mind no longer being pulled in every direction. True silence is not what surrounds you, it is what no longer possesses you from within. A man once told me about the weeks after his wife had passed away. Friends came to visit, offering words of comfort, bringing food, sending messages. He appreciated their kindness, but none of it reached the part of him that was grieving. Then, one morning, he sat alone on their old porch, where they used to drink tea together. There was no one around, no sound but the wind moving through the trees. And he said to me, "It wasn't the comfort of others that helped me feel close to her, it was that silence." For the first time, I wasn't trying to push the pain away. I just sat with it. And in that stillness, I could feel her. That is the power of true silence. It makes space for what is real, not the noise of distraction, not the echo of habit, but the quiet truth we've been too busy to hear. In the noise of life, we often bury our sadness, avoid our questions, numb ourselves with movement. But silence brings us face to face with what truly matters. Not to overwhelm us, but to reveal what has always been there beneath the surface. The Buddha did not teach silence as withdrawal. He taught it as presence. It is not turning away from life, but turning more deeply into it with eyes open, with heart still. In that kind of silence, we don't run from sorrow. We don't chase joy. We simply sit in the gentle truth of this moment, and allow it to be enough. True silence is not fragile. It does not depend on others being quiet or the world being calm. It is the strength of a mind that no longer needs to chase, escape, explain, or control. It is the stillness of being fully here. And in that stillness, something ancient awakens. The breath returns to its natural rhythm. The heart speaks in a language older than words. And the soul, long exiled in the noise, finds its way home. Letting go is not a retreat from life, it is a return to it. It is not weakness, nor resignation. It is the wisdom to see that holding on too tightly creates tension, and that in silence, we find the space to release what was never meant to be held forever. True letting go does not begin with force, it begins in stillness. A Thai monk once shared the story of an old man who spent many years carving a wooden statue of the Buddha. Each curve, each detail, was shaped by love. But one day, a great flood came and swept the statue away. The villagers mourned, but the old man simply looked at the empty space and said, "It has returned to the earth. Now I, too, return to letting go." That response did not come from indifference. It came from deep silence. The kind of silence that listens without resisting. The kind that understands without needing to explain. The kind that heals. Because it is in silence that we finally stop struggling. We stop telling ourselves how things should have been. We stop rehearsing the past or bargaining with the future. In that space, the heart begins to soften. The breath slows. And healing, the kind that words cannot reach, begins to unfold. The Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. And it is in silence that we most clearly hear that peace. Letting go, then, is not a dramatic act. It is a quiet one. It is sitting with the truth without needing to control it. It is breathing through the ache instead of pushing it away. It is making room for life to rearrange itself, without resistance. The world tells us that healing requires answers. But in the Dharma, healing begins the moment we stop asking why and start listening with stillness. Silence does not erase our pain, it holds it. It does not rush us to move on, it stays with us, patiently, until we're ready to breathe again. So no, letting go is not defeat. It is silence making space for the heart to return to itself. And in that sacred stillness, healing gently begins. There is a quiet irony in the way we live. As we grow older, we are given more time, but we spend much of it wandering through memories or worrying about what lies ahead. The body slows down, the world around us becomes quieter, yet the mind continues to travel. It visits old regrets, rehearses future fears, and rarely pauses long enough to meet the one place where life truly happens, the present. The Buddha taught, the past is already gone. The future is not yet here. There is only one moment for you to live, and that is the present moment. Simple words, but how easily they are forgotten. Imagine your mind as a snow globe. When shaken, the flakes swirl chaotically, and the scene inside is blurred. But if you set it down and leave it undisturbed, the flakes begin to settle, and clarity returns. So too with awareness. When we stop shaking the mind with constant thought, the present moment reveals itself not as something ordinary, but as something sacred. There is a Zen saying, when hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. It may sound childlike, even absurd, but it contains a deep truth. Most of us do not simply eat, we scroll our phones, plan tomorrow's errands, dwell on yesterday's conversations. We do not simply rest, we lie down and think about what we have not yet done. We are rarely where our bodies are. And yet, this moment, this breath, this exact now is the only place where life is actually alive. The past is a shadow. The future is a mirage. But the present is a doorway. Not just to mindfulness, but to freedom. Returning to the present does not require a dramatic effort. It begins with noticing. Noticing the warmth of tea in your hand. The sensation of your feet touching the ground. The softness of the air as it enters your lungs. These are not small things. These are the fibers of being alive. Silence helps us return. In silence, we are no longer pulled outward. We are drawn inward to what is real, to what is immediate. And in that space, even the most ordinary moments begin to shimmer with meaning. So let us stop chasing what was, or fearing what might be. Let us instead arrive fully, simply, quietly into what is. Not because it is perfect, but because it is true. And in that truth, peace begins to take root. You do not need to climb a mountain or enter a remote monastery to find peace. You do not need to retreat from the world or undergo 10 days of silence to meet your own stillness. What you need after 60, or at any age, is the gentle courage to come home to yourself, just as you are, in this very moment. Start simply. Sit quietly, without expectation. Let the world come to you. Do not analyze the sounds around you. Do not name the birdsong or measure the silence between each breeze. Just listen with the ears of your heart, not the judgments of your mind. Next, return to the breath. This faithful companion has followed you from your first moment of life. And yet, how often do we truly feel it? Sit down. Place a hand on your chest or your belly. And breathe, not to control, not to fix, just to notice. Inhale gently. Exhale fully. Let each breath remind you, you are here. You are alive. Then, when thoughts arise, and they will, observe them. Do not fight them. Do not cling to them. Simply name them softly in your mind: a memory, a fear, a plan, a judgment. Watch them pass like clouds in the vast sky of awareness. You are not the cloud. You are the sky. This practice is not about silencing the mind. It is about softening its grip. Not emptying thought, but learning not to be carried away by it. Like a river that flows gently without resistance, the mind too begins to settle when no longer pushed or pulled. These are not difficult techniques. They are quiet invitations. And the most important part is not to get it right. The most important part is to return. Return again and again. Each time the mind wanders, come back. Each time you forget, remember. Each time you feel lost, pause and simply be. This returning, this remembering, this quiet noticing, this is the path. Not to become perfect, but to become present. Not to fix the mind, but to befriend it. And in that friendship, to finally hear the deep silence that heals. Dear one, if today your mind feels restless, if life feels like a series of unfinished tasks and unanswered questions, then pause. Just pause. You are not your thoughts. You are the quiet awareness that observes them without judgment, without fear. In that silence, there is room for sorrow, for memory, for love, and for letting go. But most of all, in that silence, there is you present, whole, and at peace. You don't need to fix everything. You don't need to become anything more. You only need to return softly, gently to the stillness within. It is not emptiness. It is spaciousness. It is not withdrawal. It is deep presence. If this message touched something inside you, I invite you to take one small step, share your reflection in the comments, subscribe to Lotus of Dharma, and let others walk this path of quiet wisdom with us. And above all, let this silence be enough for now, and perhaps, forever.